I don't know that Trump's decision really made such a huge difference. And I mean, if it was Trump who influenced her decision, then she should probably cancel her U.S. tours as well.
You're listening to Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network.
Hello and welcome to Inside Israel Today here on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com. And this is our last show of the year of 2017. A very fun, exciting, very positive year for the state of Israel, for the people of Israel, where it looks like things are going our way, security-wise, thank God, diplomatically, economically. Life here in Israel right now, by most accounts, is pretty darn good, thank God. And we're looking ahead to 2018. Our next show here on the Land of Israel Network, on thelandofisrael.com, will be in 2018. And we hope that that will be a good year for the state of Israel and the Jewish people as well. But a lot will depend on the news going on right now as we speak. Right now as we speak, the Knesset is debating a bill called the Recommendations Bill, which is very controversial. That bill would require the police to not issue recommendations or summaries of their work to the Attorney General, who makes the decisions about whether to indict public figures. Now, theoretically, Netanyahu's investigations would not count because they are already going on, but the submarine affair, which Netanyahu is officially not a suspect in, if the bill passes, then it would count for that. And that could be the most serious of all the different investigations. So the coalition of Netanyahu is trying to pass that in the Knesset, but there is a filibuster going on where the opposition is giving very, very, very long speeches in order to delay this vote. A member of Knesset, Yoel Chasson, who theoretically could still answer text messages and come on our show, is there in the plenum and spoke there for more than 3 hours this morning. His colleague from the Zionist Union faction, Stav Shafir, spoke for an hour and a half, which I'm glad I did not cover. It must not be easy having to report what's going on there if you really have to listen to all of it. I'm glad I've received summaries of these speeches. But more power to these members of Knesset, who they obviously have a lot to say and care very deeply. Their point of view, these opposition members of Knesset, is that Netanyahu's government shouldn't be caring so much about a bill intended to serve one man. It should be instead passing other bills that would help the people of Israel more. Now, never mind, they did pass a few bills last night before this started. But the opposition is spending hours talking about how the Knesset should be using its time to deal with other things, which is cute. And that was still a very good point, that Netanyahu and his government don't seem to be making as much effort to pass legislation that affects the people as they are to pass this bill that theoretically, technically could help Netanyahu. And that, of course, would not be all right if it were true. And so why is Netanyahu trying so hard that he's willing to embarrass himself with legislation like this that clearly makes him look bad? Does this indicate, does this and the fact that he gave a speech last week where he criticized the police very strongly, which I covered in Ramat Gan, does this prove that Netanyahu is guilty? After all, he's certainly acting like someone who's guilty. The answer is no. Netanyahu has his own reasons for acting as paranoid as he has been acting. Netanyahu is very worried because of what happened back in 2009. The way that Netanyahu came to power was when Ehud Olmert had his own criminal investigations, his government was overthrown. The police issued their recommendations, and although the police recommendations technically don't mean anything, the Attorney General decides on his own whether to indict a prime minister. The coalition parties of Ehud Olmert decided that this was too much, and they would instead try to have somebody else within his government, Tzipi Livni perhaps, form a government. So Ehud Barak was the main force in driving Ehud Olmert out of office, which ultimately led to Netanyahu coming to power. And for a period of time, Ehud Barak was then the defense minister of Netanyahu. And so Netanyahu has a genuine fear that that can happen to him. Yesterday, I spent time going around to the different faction meetings in the Knesset and talking to the leaders of the parties about whether they think this will happen to Netanyahu. And so we started off with the Labour Party, led by Avi Gabay, and Gabay certainly has an interest in initiating elections as soon as possible. And so I asked him about comments that had been made by a strategist that once worked with the Labour Party and recently worked with the police, who said that the police recommendations will be earth-shattering, could cause a political earthquake. And I asked, can this political earthquake be enough to remove Moshe Kachlon, the leader of the Kulanu party, from his cabinet seat? Now, even though Avi Gabay and Moshe Kachlon have a big fight going on, Gabay formed Kachlon's party together with him and then left the government to protest the appointment of Avigdor Lieberman as the defense minister, and then he joined the Labour Party and won the election to become the leader of the Labour Party. And they're still fighting over money and over how their breakup exactly happened. Still, Avi Gabay refused to answer the question and said, I'm not a political commentator. Well, all the other political leaders weren't afraid about answering the same question. I then went to Yair Lapid, who gave a wonderful answer to the question and spoke about how he believes this will be the political earthquake, and in fact, it's already happening because there are plenty of members of Knesset who don't want to be a smokescreen for criminal activity. And we saw how after that I spoke to Avigdor Lieberman, who also addressed it and said the police recommendations mean nothing, and a lot of time happens between the police recommendations and the Attorney General's ruling from his own experience, and so he doesn't expect the recommendations that are supposed to be released in another 2-3 weeks to have any effect on Israel politically. And then I spoke to Naftali Bennett, who Bennett said he does not think that it's right for the police to cause an election here. So giving a hint as to what his party would do, but he's not giving a final answer. He says that he wants to see the recommendations first, which is a responsible answer. And so going around among all the party leaders, and then we don't know what's going to happen in another 2 or 3 weeks. Really, anything could happen. We could have an election initiated almost immediately. That would happen probably in May of 2018. The 70th birthday celebrations of Israel that are being planned with great fanfare could happen during an election. Or Naftali Bennett, Moshe Kachlon, and all the different party heads will say these police recommendations don't mean anything, and then we'd all be waiting for months for the actual decision of the Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit. Now, Mandelblit is Netanyahu's former cabinet secretary and was appointed by him, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Mandelblit will rule in Netanyahu's favor. He, if anything, could be the opposite. He could want to show, oh, I'm independent. I got this job not because Netanyahu wanted me to have the job, but because I'm so smart and skilled. And so Mandelblit also could take into account his own political considerations. The only job you can go up to from Attorney General is justice in the Supreme Court. And if anything, it's a left-wing body that wouldn't want Netanyahu to stay in power that selects the judges for the Supreme Court. So the people of Israel, an overwhelming majority of them, though, trust Mandelblit that he would make a very professional recommendation. Now, if he decides to indict the Prime Minister, and we haven't had an election yet, then that could be what would bring him down. And the Likud might end up having to pick a different leader. But it wouldn't have to. By law, Netanyahu can still run for Prime Minister. He is still innocent until proven guilty. Only a court of law convicting Netanyahu could really stop him for good. Nobody knows how long that could take. That could take a matter of years. Netanyahu could then be reelected before that would take place. Or the Attorney General could end up deciding that Netanyahu is entirely clear, which would allow him to move forward politically. And if that happens, he would probably initiate an election in which he would do very well, and all the people who tried to bring him down would have failed. So I think we're going to have a very exciting 2018 ahead, where we're going to be finding out whether we're going to have elections. We're going to find out whether Netanyahu is officially corrupt, as deemed by the Attorney General, the man who makes that decision. We're going to find out whether Netanyahu will be allowed to continue what he's been doing in trying to improve Israel's relations with the world. After yesterday, we had Guatemala recognizing Jerusalem as our capital and announcing that they will be moving their embassy here to the capital, following in the footsteps of the United States. There are more countries on the way that will be moving their embassies over here, including an Eastern European country that's expected to announce it sometime in the next few days. Perhaps some Pacific Island nations. Papua New Guinea is one we're looking to for the near future. We'll see if that happens. And so with countries around the world starting to follow Donald Trump's lead and recognize Jerusalem as our capital and move the embassies over here, things look like they're going very good for Israel. But we also got bad news, where the singing sensation of New Zealand, Lorde, canceled her trip here to Tel Aviv, where she was going to be giving a concert next June. And we're going to be talking about this after the break with the culture correspondent of the Jerusalem Post, who's very talented, Amy Spiro. Stay with us. And we're back here on Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network, on the landofisrael.com, where we are with the cultural correspondent of the Jerusalem Post, Amy Spiro, who wrote in the newspaper today that the cancellation of the singer from New Zealand, Lorde, is a huge win for the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement against Israel. Tell me, Amy, why is it such a big deal to have a 21-year-old girl not coming to Israel?
I'd call her a 21-year-old woman. But yeah, I mean, this was such a win for the BDS movement because it played out so vocally and so internationally. And she is a big star. I mean, this is the biggest win they've had since Lauryn Hill pulled out in 2015. It might even be bigger than that because she's really at a much better place in her career. She was just nominated for a Grammy. And yeah, she's kind of the first, she's certainly the biggest act in years to cancel a concert that was already scheduled, and to ascribe it to political motivations, which is really what the BDS movement is dying to hear.
What was her explanation for this decision?
Well, what happened is that she announced last week on Twitter that she announced 3 new shows in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Tel Aviv. And then since then she was like, bombarded with, calls to cancel. And then last week on Wednesday or Thursday, she replied to one of these open letters calling her not to show up in Israel, saying she was considering all options. And then in the statement that she put out through local PR here on Sunday, she said that, she didn't make the right decision originally, and the right decision at this time was to cancel. She didn't call out Israel for specifically any actions, but she made it clear that this was politically motivated and that she was heeding the calls of the boycott supporters to cancel.
Is there any Donald Trump effect here? Can we blame him in any way for this happening?
I guess you would like to blame him. I don't think so. I've seen that a lot. I've seen people saying to me on Twitter, when I say that there's been so many more acts that come than that cancel, people will say, oh, well, this is the first cancellation since, Donald Trump's declaration. I don't personally see any connection. I mean, the BDS supporters have pulled the same thing with every single, prominent person who announces a show in Israel. And they use this, the fact that they mention now, Trump is just sort of like an added, line in their open letters. But I mean, it's the same campaign they've always run. And I can't imagine that Lorde really, made her, I mean, I can't speak to her exact motivations, but I don't know that Trump's decision really made such a huge difference. And I mean, if it was Trump who so influenced her decision, then she should probably cancel her U.S. Tours as well.
And Russia isn't exactly known for its human rights pleasantness.
It certainly is not. Russia, treats homosexuals, treats political dissidents, treats many, many people, putting aside military actions in Ukraine, which are obviously under strong international condemnation. Russia is not known for being a bastion of human rights, but one of the things that was interesting in her initial tweet when she announced those 3 shows is that nobody really cared at all that she was playing in Russia. It wasn't a problem, but it was the Israeli show that drew the most ire, which certainly is not surprising to those of us following these things, but fairly hypocritical.
So the question really is, Amy, how did Israel drop the ball and allow this to happen? The last hourly news update that there was on the radio, they said that Israel's ambassador from New Zealand is trying to get a meeting with Lorde in order to try to persuade her to still come next year. And I'm thinking, fire the ambassador right now. Why are you doing this now and not the moment that there started to be these tweets? You'd think that somebody would have woken up the embassy over there and said, do something quickly before she cancels.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to call to fire the ambassador. He did write on Facebook this morning that he's hoping to speak with her and to say that music, unites us, not divides us. But I think, I don't know if I'd say we dropped the ball. Obviously, this, is bad PR for us, and the international media loves to pounce on these stories, and it got tons and tons of coverage around the globe. But personally, I think that the more government intervention, the worse it looks, right? Because if she reverses her decision based on, what the ambassador says or Miri Regev's statement from Sunday, then she looks even more like she's, following the demands of the Israeli government. And I think what people here want to say is, hey, we're not our government. We're fans. We want to hear live music. We love you. We want people to come regardless of what the government thinks. And we're not, we're not asking you to come support the government. We're asking you to come support your fans.
That's a very good point. So who do we have coming up in 2018 who are BDS activist listeners to Inside Israel Today on the Land of Israel Network on thelandofisrael.com can start pressuring?
Can start pressuring to come?
Our BDS supporters that listen here would probably want them not to come.
I'm
sure. Let's give them a guide for who to pressure.
I'm sure you have a lot. Let's see. I know Foreigner is coming up next year. I mean, it's a little early right now to really talk about the big summer shows, but Foreigner is supposed to be coming next year. Ozzy Osbourne is supposed to be coming next year. Ringo Starr, the former Beatle, is supposed to be coming. And there were always lots of other rumors in the works. People were talking all of this past year that Coldplay was going make a show, and they kept denying it. But Chris Martin did come twice over the past year, including bringing his girlfriend just a month ago. So he's certainly a fan of ours, and could be that we'll end up with a show from them next year.
And what about us, those of us who are praying for Beyonce to arrive here?
I mean, Beyonce has been rumored, for years. Some of it, I think, is wishful thinking. If you write that Beyonce is rumored to come, will she show up? But, she's probably one of the biggest stars on the globe. She has a very busy schedule. She may come, she may not come. People would like to ascribe her not showing up this year to BDS, but, we have zero way of knowing, why she hasn't come, because she was never actually booked here. Just
anybody else we should be, that there's rumors could come that we should be hoping for?
Well, One Republic was here in 2015, and they said last year that they really, really wanted to come back, but we haven't heard anything from them. So they may return. There are people who love coming here, and they know that they get the reception. I mean, when you show up in Park Hayarkon and you have 50,000 screaming fans, I mean, that's an ego boost for even the, the biggest stars. So, there's communities where, the artist understands that this is a great place to perform, and those will keep coming. And, there are people who will never show up here, and will learn to live with it.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I will end the show by saying that I'm very excited to be, that I've obtained tickets to go to Seinfeld on Saturday night. I had to pay for them. I don't know, Amy, did you get a free ticket to Seinfeld?
I did. I'm going to the 10 o'clock. Which are you going to?
I've got to go earlier. We don't stay up so late around. But I'm happy to tell you the jokes that he said, and you'll tell me the jokes that he said in the later show. And
I think the later show may be a little raunchier. We'll see.
Okay, so thank you so much for coming here on thelandofisrael.com, on Inside Israel Today, Amy Spiro, the culture correspondent of the Jerusalem Post.
Thank you, Gil.
And listeners, thank you for being with us here on our show. Let's hope for a good end to 2017, and see you next year from here in Jerusalem. Bye-bye.